Hello, and now we're going to talk about motor units, muscle tone, and different types of contractions. So a motor unit is a motor neuron and all of the muscle fibers it supplies. So one motor neuron, and it may go to 4 muscle fibers or it may go to hundreds of muscle fibers. So the motor unit is the one neuron and however many muscle fibers it goes to. And I have a picture here to kind of demonstrate what that would look like. So I have 2 motor units with the purple one here and then the red one here. And in motor unit number 1, we have the one neuron, and it's going out to 2 muscle fibers. So it's synapsing with 2 separate muscle fibers in the same muscle. So here's the one muscle, and here are the fascicles with the bundles of muscle fibers. And in motor unit number 2, we have one neuron, and it's going to synapse with 3 different muscle cells. So each one of those is a motor unit. So let's talk about why we have motor units and what they do. So a motor unit, they can come in many sizes. Remember I said a motor unit can be 1 neuron to 4 muscle fibers or even 1 to hundreds. A small motor unit would be that 1 to 4 ratio, 1 neuron to 4 muscle fibers. And it can be 1 to 6 or 1 to 7. I'm just kind of giving you an example of a small ratio. And you're going to see these in muscles that you use for fine movement. For example, your fingers and your eyes. So muscles that move really, really quickly, you have a lot of control over. Large motor units will be 1 neuron to 100 or maybe even 1,000 muscle cells. And these are going to be large muscles that are typically weight-bearing, that don't have a lot of dexterity, they don't have a lot of fine movement. For example, in your thighs and your hips. So these will be large motor unit muscles. Now, in a motor unit, these muscle fibers are spread throughout the muscle. Okay, so that a single motor unit will cause a weak contraction of the whole muscle. So what does that mean? So let's draw that muscle motor unit again. So here was my neuron, and so here's my muscle. I'm just going to draw this as several different muscle fibers. Okay, let's just say I've got 6 muscle fibers in this muscle. If I need to contract a muscle and maybe hold it for a while, and I have 2 motor neurons, so let's just go back where I had number 1 and number 2, I might start out with contracting muscle fiber number 1 and maybe muscle fiber number 4. And these would shorten, and as they shorten, they would shorten the muscle and cause the muscle to contract. Well, this motor unit is going to get tired. You're going to run out of ATP and it's going to fatigue and it can't do it forever. So you're going to let that motor neuron take a break. And then this one, number 2, can come in and it can cause the motor muscle fiber number 2 and maybe number 3 and maybe number 5 and number 6 for them to contract. Okay? So you can, each motor unit can cause the muscle to contract weakly. And so usually a muscle will contract what we call asynchronously, where one motor unit will contract and cause some of the muscle fibers to contract, and then it will take a break and another motor unit will contract and then it will take a break, and back and forth, so that no particular muscle cell gets really tired or fatigued. You can also do both of them at the same time. So if you needed to pick up something heavy, so you might use both motor units so that you are recruiting all of these muscle fibers at the same time. Okay, so these motor units allow us to use our muscles in a graded way, so we can pick up light things and heavy things, and also to give different parts of our muscles a break, to let them rest, so that one motor unit is causing part of the muscle to contract, takes a break, another motor unit takes over and causes the contraction to continue. So it allows your muscle to take a break. So let's talk about how if you increase the stimulation of a muscle, sent more action potentials out to a muscle, you could actually recruit more motor units. Okay, so let's pretend that we're going to use, let's just, voltage. We're going to say these action potentials have a certain level of voltage. And this is the whole muscle. And so if we stimulated it with a threshold, or a stimulus of 1, you would see that none of those motor units had that threshold. Okay, that's that's below their threshold. It's sub-threshold. So nothing happens. So you could even zap it again, give it a little more voltage. Again, nothing happens. There's no contraction. Eventually, if your nervous system sends enough stimulus and you reach threshold, okay, so for this particular muscle cell, these that have turned red, those muscle fibers, 3 was their threshold. So now they're recruited. So now these muscle fibers are going to contract and you'll get a weak contraction. Now, let's say you used that, your brain was telling your muscle to pick up a penny, and so that's all you needed. But now your brain is sending enough signal because it sees that you want to pick up a telephone. We need to send out enough stimulus to pick up a telephone. And so we're going to do a stimulus of 4. Well, that would cause those original muscle fibers, that motor unit, to be recruited. And then this additional 1, 2, 3, this is a second motor unit. So now you're going to have 5 motor fibers or muscle fibers contracting. That's going to be a stronger contraction. So now let's say that my brain wants me to pick up my computer. So now I'm going to send out enough stimulus to pick up a computer. And so now I've recruited not only those original motor units, plus that second motor unit, I've picked up another, third motor unit. So now I have a bigger contraction. And so on and so forth. As you need more and more force, more and more strength, you're going to recruit more and more motor units until finally you've reached what's called maximal stimulus, that regardless of how hard you try, how much action potential you send, how much the brain really wants you to be stronger, your muscle is maximally contracted because you've recruited all of your motor units. Okay? You can't possibly contract that muscle anymore because you're using every fiber, every muscle cell in the muscle. So if you increase the stimulation, you will recruit more and more motor units, which will lead to a stronger and stronger contraction. Now, another way you can increase the force of the contraction, the strength of the contraction, is to recruit larger motor units that have larger fibers. So when you look at motor units, some motor units have small fibers, so we're talking about the diameter of the muscle cell. Some are a little larger, medium size, and then you have some very large ones. And the larger the muscle fiber, the stronger it is. So if you were going to pick up a penny, you might recruit a motor unit with 1 or 2 muscle fibers that were small, and that would give you a little bit of force, a little bit of contraction. If you wanted to pick up a telephone, you could pick up using another motor unit, add a second motor unit, but also use some larger fibers. The medium-sized fibers would allow you to have a stronger contraction. If you're going to pick up the computer, you would recruit number 1 and number 2, but also a third motor unit with some large fibers. So the greater stimulus will lead to more recruitment of more motor units, but also larger motor units. Motor units with larger fibers. So the diameter of the fibers, again, the larger the diameter, the stronger the fiber. So when people work out doing resistance training, lifting heavier and heavier weights over time, the muscles respond by increasing the diameter of the muscle fibers. So when you have big bulky muscles, you're not really growing more muscle or making more muscle cells. Those muscle cells are just getting bigger. So they're growing in diameter, they're getting larger, and they're getting stronger. Now the next concept is muscle tone. And muscle tone means that you are in a constant, all your muscles are constantly slightly contracted. Okay, and you're like, really? Well, take a look at your hand. So if you just relax your hand and just kind of hold it, you'll notice that your fingers kind of curl in. That's because the muscles in your forearm, your flexor digitorum, they're a little stronger, they have a little better tone than their extensor digitorums, and so they stay a little slightly more contracted, and so they're going to contract your fingers. And so you always have a little bit of muscle tone so that all of your muscles are always a little bit contracted. And this is due to a spinal reflex. We don't really know what reflexes are because we haven't covered them yet, but let's just say our spinal cord's acting like our brain and telling our muscles to contract just a little bit. We'll go over reflexes later. But your spinal cord will send out a signal to activate different groups of motor units kind of alternately or asynchronously, just to keep your muscles a little bit contracted. So they're always a little bit contracted, and it allows them to stay firm and healthy and ready to go. So it's like you're priming them and getting them ready to go. You want to have your sarcomeres at the optimum length. So you want to keep your muscles a little bit contracted so that actin and myosin are optimally separated from each other so that they can readily grab each other and start to contract. If the sarcomeres are too close together, they're too contracted, there's really nowhere for them to go. You don't get a really strong contraction. And if the actin and myosin and the sarcomeres too far, they can't even grab each other, so there's very little contraction. So you'll notice someone that's paralyzed will have very flaccid muscles, which means there's no tone to them. They're going to be real floppy. So in a healthy person, non-paralyzed, you're always going to have this information from your spinal cord sending out action potentials to your muscles to keep them in a slightly contracted tone. Now sometimes you'll notice when you first wake up out of bed, maybe you've been in a really, really deep sleep and you've been woken up and you're like, oh, you feel like a rag doll because your spinal cord's taking a little bit of a break, and so sometimes your muscles feel really floppy, like they don't have any tone, and that's what's happened because you've been in such a deep sleep that some of those muscles have relaxed because your body's resting. It's getting ready for the next day. But we want to have muscle tone. So just notice, look at your hands, and you'll trust me that yes, you do have muscle tone. That you're always in a little bit of a contracted state throughout your body. So we've been talking about contractions and sustained contractions and things like that. There's two types of contractions. Muscles can contract using what's called isotonic contractions or isometric contractions. And these are two terms you want to get to know, especially if you like to exercise and work out your muscles. In isotonic contractions, your muscles change length. Okay, so as the muscle is contracting, the length is changing. And it can do that in one of two ways. They can be either concentric or eccentric. And so most of us are really familiar with a concentric contraction. This is when your muscle shortens as it does the work. So imagine picking up a dumbbell and contracting your muscle. The muscle's going to shorten and it's going to do the work. An eccentric contraction means the muscle is still contracting, it's still working, but it's lengthening. So imagine holding that dumbbell again, and so if you slowly release the dumbbell, your biceps brachii would still be contracting, but it would be contracting as it's lengthening. So when you're working out, you want to raise the weight slowly and release the weight slowly so that you're using the concentric and eccentric portions of the contraction. Now your muscle can also contract without actually shortening, and so or lengthening. So if it's an isometric contraction, that means that there's so much load, there's so much weight that you're trying to lift or move that the muscle doesn't even change shape. So imagine pushing against a door. You're pushing all that you can against that door, but your muscle may be quivering, but it's not getting shorter or getting longer. Those are isometric exercises. So isometric means, so imagine pulling against so let's say this is a fixed, it's not actually a dumbbell, maybe it's a bar on a wall, and you're pulling with all your might, and your muscles contracting, but it's not getting any shorter. Those are isometrics. Concentrics, isotonics is when you're shortening, you're contracting, and you're shortening the muscle. And in isotonic eccentric contractions, as you're releasing or lowering the weight in this case, the muscle is lengthening, yet it's still contracting. So when you're exercising, you want to make sure you're doing all three of these, all these three different types of muscle contractions to get an optimal exercise. All of these work to make the best, strongest, most healthy muscle. A lot of people just do the concentric exercises, so slow down, get those eccentric exercises, and then add some isometrics. Okay, all you need is a door frame or your desk or anything like that. Just push against that or pull against something and get some isometric contractions. It'll help keep your muscles strong and healthy. All right, so before we move on, I want to just do a quick review of some things we've covered so far, and then we're going to move into the next video. We're going to talk about energy and the types of energy, ATP, that we need for our muscles to contract. So these principles I want to review, I want you to remember that a lot of the stuff we talked about, like twitch and tetanus, these things that apply to a single fiber also can apply to a whole muscle. So a single stimulus to a single fiber would cause a twitch. A single stimulus to a muscle can also cause a twitch. So we've talked a lot about muscle fibers, but they also apply to the muscle cells as a whole. Anytime you contract a muscle, that's going to produce tension, which is going to generate force. Okay, so that's the force is the tension, that's the contraction, that's the power that we use to lift and move things with our muscles. Okay, so contraction produces tension, which produces force. Contractions don't always mean the muscle shortens. Remember, you have isotonics and isometrics, so muscles don't always have to shorten when they're contracting. And how hard or how forcefully a muscle contracts and how long it contracts, it's varied on how much stimuli, okay? So how quickly you stimulate the muscle and how frequently you stimulate the muscle. So remember, the more frequently you stimulate a muscle, the stronger the contraction. Do you remember this, the trepi, where it goes like that? Or the harder, the more stimulus you give it, the stronger the contraction. So remember, if you stimulate it with a higher and higher stimulus, you'll recruit more and more motor units and bigger fibers and get a stronger contraction. So there's many ways for your muscles to contract and to contract in a graded way. We have the amazing ability to use the same muscles to pick up something very, very light. I can pick up a feather with my biceps brachii, and I can pick up a 15-pound barbell, okay? Because of the amount of stimulus and how frequently I stimulate that muscle in order to pick that up. And then if I want to hold it there for a while to sustain that contraction, okay, to hold the feather in my arm for 10 or 15 minutes or the barbell in my arm, hold it up for 10 or 15 minutes. We'll talk about the energy required to do that, and we'll talk about some fatigue issues in our next video. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you on the next video.